Well, good afternoon. How's everybody today? Yeah, a cheerful crowd. My name is Erin Newmeyer. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Strategic Initiatives. I just want to thank you for joining us today, whether you're here in the room or you're live on the webcast. Today's conversation will discuss the legislation that was passed by our state legislators providing the university more flexibility within our human resources rules. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. This presentation that you guys are going to see in its entirety will be available online afterwards for viewing at your convenience. It's at bureaucracybusters.wvu.edu, as well as all the previous campus conversations. As we begin taking questions, I ask that you hold until someone gets to you with a microphone so that the folks on the live stream can hear the question as well, not just the answer. And we ask that your questions be general in nature. We do have some employee relations folks that will be available after the conversation in the back of the room so that you can ask specific questions of them if you need that sort of answer. And if you're watching online, you can participate in the Q&A and submit questions. You can do that by emailing them to campusconversations@mail.wvu.edu, and we'll be monitoring those and taking those questions as well. One last reminder, this is not a part of the 30-day public comment period, so this is an informal Q&A for you guys to ask questions. If you do or would like to submit a question officially, you can do so at policies.wvu.edu. We'll remind you that a couple times throughout the presentation, and we'll show that URL at the end as well. So let's begin. I'm going to run through a little bit about what we're going to do today. So Rob is going to explain the BOG transition project. We're going to discuss the newly proposed BOG talent and culture rules. We will also explain how to review and officially comment on those proposed rules, and then we're going to open it up for the majority of the time to questions and answers. A little bit about how today will work. You're going to hear from Rob and Chris, and then again, we're going to answer it for Q&A, open it up for Q&A. We're asking that you keep those questions to university-wide decisions, and that if you have a personnel issue, you see an employee relations member after the conversation. So with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters today, Rob Alsop, Vice President for Strategic Initiatives, and Chris DeBoard, Vice President of Talent and Culture. So we're going to begin the conversation. Please help me welcome Rob Alsop.
So the BOG Rule Transition Project, I think through previous campus conversations and information that's been submitted during this past legislative session, the university moved through a number of legislative initiatives, one of which primarily designed for human resources, but also other legislation that gave the university more autonomy as it related to finance and administration and governance moving forward. And so if you look at the structure of higher education in West Virginia, WVU received a lot more flexibility in developing its own rules and moving forward from that perspective. And so once the legislation was passed, not only from a human resources perspective, but from all those subject matter areas, we really began a process of looking at our current rules and trying to move those to more contemporary and best practices for higher education. And so over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, you'll see really all of our rules, finance, administration, human resources, student life, governance, go through a series of rules. And so our Board of Governors met last month and proposed for comment a number of rules, one related to governance and then several related to talent and culture. And so this, like our other previous discussions with the campus, is really designed to get out the message and get feedback and answer questions moving forward, so that at the end of a year from now, we really have a set of rules that encompass those best practices and really establish the university as the ultimate rulemaker for matters on our campus. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about the specific talent and culture rules that are out for comment right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to go through just the best way to describe this would be the headlines on each one of these. So what are the big changes with each one of these policies? Then we're going to open it up to Q&A. But as I look around the audience, I see some faces that folks were in policy development workshops with us. They're in prior campus conversations. So first, just let me say thanks for coming back and continuing to talk with us about this topic. And then welcome to Potomac State and Beckley out there. Please remember you guys have the opportunity you can pose questions, and those are coming in over there to Aaron. So as we go through Q&A, if you have a question you want to ask out there in the audience as well, feel free, and through the magic of the internet, we'll be able to answer your question too. So on performance management, the big headline changes here. One is, you may already know this, but we're doing mandatory supervisor training. So this is one of those, we're really upping our game around performance management. And we know historically we've not been incredibly consistent in that regard. We still have some folks who've worked here for a lot of years and never had a performance appraisal, and this is the year that we're really striving to make a difference in that regard. And the message we're delivering to management, this is mandatory, it's important, and it's not something we take lightly, it's not something we're going to skip. So a written annual performance review is required. What is great around that, and I just want to recognize Amber Tennant and her team. Amber is our Director of Employee Relations. When we went through this, when we got the freedoms, we talked about performance management, and our prior system was all paper-based. And we thought, it's really hard when you have a paper-based system to even know, are these reviews being done on time? About 6 months later, we could reconcile, because it's all coming into one person, and we're kind of counting those up, and that's only if they were sent in. So we challenged Amber and her team to find a way to get this online and to get an automated process where we get a lot more visibility into the process, and we get the ability to know as we go through how many self-appraisals have been completed, how many performance discussions have happened, and be able to bring some teeth and some accountability around when we say it's for real and it has to happen to managers. Now we've got a mechanism to follow up and a real-time mechanism to follow up, but they really pulled a rabbit out of their hat on that one. We talked about that as an idea at Easter, and they figured out a way to get it automated and online by the 4th of July. So, real kudos to them for doing that. I think that's going to help us all get better at the process. And then this last piece, employees will have 10 days to respond in writing to their performance review. So what we've heard here is from a lot of folks, hey, I might not really want to grieve, but I definitely have concerns in particular areas about my supervisor, about fairness. I want to be able to engage in a discussion about it. What we also found, though, is we also need to be able to kind of put a line around timing. So if we do get further down the road and it does turn into a grievance, we can all agree on what the timing was. So we've kind of put that 10-day line out there to say, after 10 days, if you haven't grieved, then we'll consider it, that is your rating. However, that doesn't mean you can't use alternatives to the grievance process. So what we're encouraging people to do is, if you have concerns, grieve it. But we'll work with you, and we've been working with the law school as well around getting a mediator that we may be able to use to kind of do alternative dispute resolution, but we want to protect your rights to grieve, and so that's why the 10-day limit is there. It doesn't mean at a later point, if it's not resolved to your satisfaction, you can't drop that grievance later, but that's just how the mechanics on that one will work. So those are the kind of big headlines on performance management. If it's okay with the group, I'm going to go through the other two as well in terms of headlines, and then we'll just open up the floor to questions on all three policies. Does that work for everybody? Okay, great. So class and comp. Big thing we're doing on class and comp is we wanted to treat classified and non-classified employees more similar in approach in terms of how we determine pricing of a job, and to really peg that to market pricing. So the old point factor job evaluation system is something that we're going to discontinue. There were a lot of unintended consequences with that point factor system. Anytime you try to take and boil what should be human judgment down into a black and white formula, that never works. It always produces unintended consequences. And so what it did here was created lots of one-to-one reporting relationships, because the way to get a job graded higher was to give that person a direct report. That was not the design or the intent, but that was one of those unintended consequences. The other was anytime you want to take care of one of your employees, you'd have to go through the process of rewriting a job description, working with our compensation team, haggling back and forth, big bureaucratic process to really do something that as a leader we trust you ought to be able to do. And so we've eliminated that point factor system, but what we have also done is increased flexibility for supervisors to move folks within the salary range. Because what we saw happening is we have lots of folks that are sitting at the bottom of their salary range, and the only way folks thought we could move them is I need to get you promoted to a different grade, and you might go from the bottom of one range to the bottom of the next range, and you could have just progressed up the range you were in and eventually made more money than if we went through that whole bureaucratic exercise of trying to regrade your job. So what we want to do is give leaders that flexibility that if somebody's within the range, you can move them within the range. You don't have to come to compensation. You don't have to say, Mother, may I? You don't have to go through this big process. We give you the flexibility to reward performers on your team. If you got it within your budget, you can go ahead and make those changes. The other piece is, you'll see here on the bottom, our strategy is going to continue to focus on attracting and retaining the best talent and really gearing rewards towards performance. So in an environment like this, when we talk about budget concerns and having to eventually do more with less is kind of the environment we're living in at this point in time. We want to make sure we keep our best people. We want to make sure we reward our best people, and we don't want to have a system that artificially constrains that. And so that's why we've kind of freed up some of the things around class and comp. And then the last one, reduction in force. This is one we hope we don't have to use, but what we did want to do is make sure that, again, in the kind of budget environment we're operating under, we didn't want to have to invent this at the time we need it. We wanted to be able to think this through in a manner where we know it's a potential that we might face someday, but it's not an urgent, right on our doorstep kind of problem. So we can think about it, we can engage people, we can have a rational discussion instead of an emotional, reactive discussion on this topic. So we went through there and did that and established here a review committee. So one of the concerns was, well, who can authorize reduction in force? The thoughts and the concerns we heard were, I want the decision to be made at the supervisory level in terms of the work that gets done. I don't want central administration trying to come in and micromanage and understand how the work gets done, but I don't want local management to have the ability to just trigger a reduction in force. And so that recommendation has to go through a review committee. That review committee is comprised of representatives from finance, human resources, legal, and we're taking a look at it with an objective eye from a university perspective to ensure there's fairness, to ensure also that we've done everything else possible before we need to ever trigger a reduction in force, that these just don't start to happen all over the place. Next piece is we established in terms of notice. There will be a 60-day notice period for any reduction in force, regardless of the size, whether that's one person or whether that's 100 person. You'll see in industry, there's an act called the WARN Act, and I believe that applies to reductions that are over, I think it's either over 50 or over 100. We've adapted the stance that it's the right thing to do no matter what. So if somebody gets impacted, even if it's one person, there'll be 60 days notice, and then after that there would be severance benefits, and we'll determine a standard severance formula based on resources that we have available at the time. But the whole thought process here is the idea is to land people softly and help them transition. The idea is not to just brutally cut costs, so that's how we're going to approach this. Factors to consider, again, in discussions we've had with everyone across all three locations. First and foremost, performance. And performance over the last 24 months would be the main determinant, and that would include prior disciplinary actions, skills and qualifications that are unique to the job that can be objectively defined and measured we would use, and then seniority would be, for lack of a better term, the tiebreaker in any of those decisions around reduction in force. And then also preserved recall rights for classified employees who leave in good standing. So if Rob's role was eliminated and then within 12 months I come back and say, oops, I made a big mistake and I need to refill Rob's role, he has right of first refusal of that role if he left in good standing, so I can't use it as a way to game the system and get around Rob, so I could put Jim into Rob's job. And so that's, those are kind of the headline items for those 3 policies. So if you want to flip to the next slide, before we open up the floor, as Aaron talked about, what we're doing today is informal Q&A. You know, we heard concerns that, hey, some folks just don't know enough about the policies to know what questions they want to ask. That's what today's session is all about. But after today, if there's anything that you want to be officially part of the comment period for these rules, this is where you would go to do that. And then, again, we'll communicate that at the close of this session as well. But we just want to have that up so you know that these are separate and distinct. What we're doing is not part of the official comment period. This is just informal for you so you can ask questions, and if there is something you want to ask and formally have part of the record, you go this way. Okay? So with that, we'll open up to questions. Yes, ma'am.
On the last slide, I'm sorry. On the last slide with the right of first refusal.
Flip back to that one.
When, would that classified employee, would they have to start over, or would they be able to retain their previous status as like years of service and all that kind of stuff?
So that is a good question. I'm going to punt to my employee relations experts in the room. I believe it depends on timing and how long you've been away, correct?
Yeah, it would depend. Our current rules right now that we have in place address when an employee returns to work. So it depends on the topic that you're discussing, for example, service or sick leave and that kind of thing. So they would generally, if they came back within a year, regain a lot of those standings that they had as a prior employee.
It's the spirit and intent there. What we're trying to get at is that if you're eliminating a position, it's because it's a cost issue, right? And so that position shouldn't pop back up within 12 months. Now, obviously, there's always circumstances, change around budget, funding, those kind of things. But so we've allowed for, there may be an unforeseen circumstance where that occurs, but in general, it should be if we're eliminating a position, we're eliminating the position.
Okay, so we have a question from someone watching via the live webcast. So this is in regards to the class and comp policy. Will the supervisor submit the job description to Talent and Culture for review? Will the employee have any input?
Okay, so the way I'll best answer this one is what we're trying to do is get away from that old practice entirely. The way it used to work was the only way you could advance somebody's pay was we have to go through the job reclassification process. We're trying to break that mindset and that cycle that the only way to advance somebody's pay is to move them up the grades. Where we're really trying to go is your supervisor is going to have tools available to them that they can give you an off-cycle merit increase. They could do an off-cycle critical retention increase. So if they've got it within their budget, they can move you within your salary range with no issues. And the only time we really ought to be reclassifying a job is when the duties truly change. If that job has really grown significantly in scope, you know, that's sort of what the original intent of that practice was supposed to be. What it's morphed into over time, though, is it's become this real bureaucratic exercise where I know our comp team evaluates, you know, hundreds of jobs a year, and on a base of, you know, this kind of workforce, we should be really reviewing a fraction of those in terms of what the spirit and intent of what that really is. So what we're trying to do is move compensation to your performance drives your compensation, not your job description. And in the past, we've always linked my job description is what drives my pay. And so, you know, I would tell you, I'm looking at the camera here because I know it came in from one of those two cameras as we answer this. Ideally, yes, we'd want your input with your supervisor if your job is significantly changed, but it's going to be up to your supervisor to work with compensation to move that through the process. But really, going forward, I'd want that to be a small fraction of why we do pay increases, and the larger piece be tied around performance and recognition of, you know, what people have actually done in their job, as opposed to trying to add some words to a position description or add a report, because that's a lot of what's happened in the past is we've added a direct report because that we knew would bump up the grade. but that's really not been optimal in terms of designing an organization structure, moving somebody's pay. It's been sort of a workaround, a perceived workaround in the system that we're trying to say, that's not productive for anybody. Let's try to discontinue that practice if we can.
So actually, it's still up to the supervisor if you go up or not.
Well, supervisor in class and comp, right? So your supervisor's got to take it forward to comp and make the recommendation, but class and comp's still going to weigh in on did the job really change, right? And we're going to raise the bar on that quite a bit, because what we are trying to do is to get into the only time we want to do that and get into that practice is when the job has really changed, not when we're trying to take care of somebody from a pay standpoint, because we're giving supervisors a lot of other tools to take care of people from a pay standpoint.
Okay, if there are, do you have one, Amy? Okay. That's okay, we'll hold the ones from the live stream.
I just have a question about the policies where you can go to the website.
This one?
Yes, when you go to, when you click on that website, are you going to be able to see everybody else's comments or not? So you don't have to so it's like not redundant, like if I ask it and then somebody else asks it and somebody else asks it, are you able to see other people's comments or not?
I'm going to let Aaron address that one.
Actually, I think Samantha's probably the best one to take that. You want to step up, Sam?
Thank you. When you go onto that website, you don't see other people's comments, but they do come in. And what we will do is, if we get a number of the same comments, when we get that and we post those comments and the determinations made back for that 10 final day posting, we would summarize if we got a number of the same ones. But if you have a question, feel free to submit that. Okay?
And so at the end of that 30-day comment period, we have to, and correct me on this, guys, if I misstate, but we've got to then post all of the comments that came in, or if they're very similar in nature, we've grouped them, and then what our resolution is on those questions, and that's something we have to discuss and decide with the Board of Governors in terms of what the resolution would be. So, and that would either be, hey, we've heard this and we agree and we're going to change, or we've heard this and we're going to continue in the direction we're going. But we have to give that summary at the end of the 30-day period, and then there's a, is it another additional 5 days that sits, or?
It sits for 10 business days.
10 more days, and then they become Board of Governor rules at that point.
When do the rules become effective?
Well, so 30-day comment period.
Yes.
We get the summary of the questions,
10-day posting.
and then we post our response to those for 10 days.
Yes, and
Okay.
then the board meeting.
Gotcha.
Okay, we have a couple questions coming in through the live stream. So this one is in regards to the BOG rule transition. So though the HR rules are the first to be looked at and reviewed, this individual is curious as when to the other rules, or when they can expect the other rules to be reviewed. For example, they're most interested in the financial process and when it will be looked at.
Yep. So, good question. So there was a board meeting in September, there's one in October, and then there's another, I believe, in December. So the original plan was to move forward with the next set of rules for proposal with the September meeting, but I think has been discussed, I'm relatively new to this position, so our longtime Vice President for Finance and Administration, actually our Associate Vice President for Finance, Narvel retired. Dan took a position with another university, and so two great individuals did a lot for the university, so there's some new blood in those positions, which means folks like me are getting up to speed, and so the finance rules will probably come up either in October or December. We were shooting for a September timeline, but we just want to make sure we get those right moving forward. So it'll depend a little bit when we're ready and through, but I would expect you would see some of the financial rules later this fall.
Okay. We'll take one more from the live stream and then open it back up to the floor. So this one, will RIF affect faculty non-classified? Is there a different policy concerning RIF for faculty versus non-classified employees?
And yes, there is. So there's already defined process on faculty. We didn't work on anything around faculty. On non-classified, it'll continue to be the same process we have used, where we give folks a notice of annual appointment, and then at any point in time during that year, if something changes and we eliminate that role, what we typically do is pay them out until the end of that annual contract. And then what we didn't have was, with these new freedoms, well, how do you deal with classified if you eliminate a classified role? And so this policy speaks specifically to classified positions, but that's because we had defined processes for the other two classifications of employees. And also, I just want to say congratulations out there to both campuses. This is the first time we've done one of these where I'm getting just as many questions from you guys out there remotely as we're getting in the room, so keep it up. That's great.
So any questions in the room? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. In the past, employees have been able to request a desk audit. Is that still going to be something that is available to them, or is that, again, going to have to come from the supervisor?
So this class and comp desk audit's just, I'm unfamiliar, haven't been here long enough and been through this.
Goes out and understands what happened.
Okay. So why don't you, let's talk a little bit about history, and then if we made a change in that particular
In the past, if you had submitted your job for review, Class and Comp oftentimes would send a couple of their staff out to meet with the employee, meet with the supervisor, and to look at the duties of the job to make sure they had a really good understanding of the job and the duties before they would evaluate whether it went up or stayed the same. So we still have that capability and that process. I think as we move forward, we would hope that there would be maybe less of that happening. But that's an option that the Class and Comp team will have to determine if that is necessary or appropriate, depending on the circumstance.
Okay, so now I get it. A lot of what we did in the past on job description was that was the main way people thought, this is how I advance my pay, right? And so a lot of what those turned into, when you talk about bureaucratic, non-value added activity, I want paid more. Come and look at my job, spin the wheel. Let's see if we get the magic words this time, or, you know, and some folks would request, I want my job looked at like routinely. That was how they moved their pay. Or now Rob works next to me and he just got an adjustment, so now you're gonna need to come and look at my job. That just drives a lot of non-value added activity, and it's not the right way to run a railroad, right? But that's kind of what we were doing. A point factor, that was the unintended consequence. The right way to do it is to say you've got a salary range, and in both cases, I might have been at 87% of that salary range. You had all kinds of room to move me. We want to give the supervisor the freedom to do that and get out of the whole process of why do we have to write a job description, go through the evaluation, send somebody out to sit there and observe. In a lot of cases, it was what we were observing wasn't really the job. It was what we were trying to do to get the job elevated. We're trying to curtail a lot of that silliness and just get to if you've got the ability to pay, go ahead and pay within the range. And if we are doing the right job of pegging the ranges to market, we're not overpaying, right? That's the way a comp process should work. So that we're just trying to right the ship and get to a more common sense approach on how you manage compensation.
So I think you just answered this, but we have a question that leads right into that. So just looking for additional clarification. So my supervisor can move me in the salary range with or without a class and comp review?
Correct. Yeah, that's when we talk about giving supervisors more flexibility, more freedoms, if it's within the range and you've got the budget and within your chain of command you think it's the right thing to do, you can go ahead and make that move. And we want to get people to start to think about, like traditionally, the mindset has been equal is fair. So if Rob gets, I should get. Where we want to change that, particularly in an environment where we're resource constrained, we're going to have to do more with less. Which one of us is the better performer, that's who should get paid more money, not that because we sit across the aisle from each other, we should get paid the same thing, right? But historically, that's what's driven it, is we've looked at if it's not equal, it's not fair. And we really want the supervisors to be in a role to where you can recognize people who perform, and you've got latitude within your budget to do that. And we want to free people up to be able to do that. Now that's new, that's a new skill set, right? So I don't think we'll get it right straight out of the gate, but that's the right way to manage an organization, not to say, well, Rob gets, I should get, Chris gets, then Rob should get.
And one of the reasons why Chris led off, I think, with the performance management rules, we know we've got to make sure our supervisors are trained to be able to handle all this.
Yeah. And so it's going to take us a while to get good at this. We're not going to be good right out of the gate. But what we're trying to do is, if you think about philosophy, you want an organization where you keep your best talent, engaged, and you're rewarding your best people, right? That's what we're trying to build in terms of a system.
I see in a lot of places that all turn out.
If you could hold just one moment, we'll get you a mic,
Oh,
please.
I got a big mouth. I'm not saying just here, but other places I've worked through the years, favoritism. That's what I see would be in a lot of, not everywhere, but
Yeah.
favoritism.
I don't disagree with you. I think one of the challenges we have to deal with is the fact that traditionally, too, we haven't done a lot to train folks who are in leadership roles. So we've dialed that up quite a bit in terms of trying to get supervisors more capable to handle this. But there's a lot that we have to do together in terms of building the system and moving from where we were to where we want to go. But it's not going to be perfect overnight. And that's why we still have a grievance process as well. And we want to be able to work through those. And I'll tell you the other piece that I'd love to see us change is a lot of the supervisor relationships we have today, we've done it based on comp, not based on are they really a leader and did we really need a leader in that role? We just needed to get somebody more pay. And so I think we have more frontline supervisors than we need. And some of those aren't in leadership roles because they want to be. They're in leadership roles because they want to be paid more, right? And so I'd rather find a way to, if they're adding value, let's find a way to pay them what they're worth. But let's get people in leadership roles that really want to lead, want to be fair, know how to do it, and then let's equip them to do that. But that's not going to happen overnight. So there are going to be cases like that. I totally agree with you. Yes, ma'am.
So with you saying that, are there people going to be demoted with this system? Because you said they're like, we're kind of top heavy. So they're going to start saying, okay, well, they're not really worth that. We're going to demote them?
Well, let me put it this way. I think we need to look at our structure. I don't want the message coming out to be, hey, we're going to use this system to demote people. That's not the spirit and intent. But if you look at our management structure right now, yeah, we're a little out of whack and we're a little top heavy and we have to figure that out. But we're going to do that on a case-by-case basis. The other thing we've talked about, and again, these are not things you can trot out and advertise, but we talked about the fact that leadership's a privilege. And we have folks that really aren't capable. We're going to make some changes. And we've quietly been making some changes across the university, and we're going to continue to do that. We're not going to lead with that. That's not what this is about. But where we do have those instances where we have folks that really shouldn't be in a leadership role, we're not going to turn a blind eye to that.
From my vantage point on that, so we have someone who was really, really good at their job, and the only way to get them compensation was to promote them to being a supervisor. The employee really doesn't like supervising. It's not what they like to do. They like to do the substance of what their work. And so if we go through and look at our structure and we say, you know what, your passion, what you're really good at is not being a supervisor, it's doing your job. And so we come up with a structure where we now have the ability to compensate where we don't have to do the artificial supervisor. And so we come up with a plan where that employee's happy because we have freedom from compensation, and we also right size from a supervisor one-to-one relationship. I wouldn't consider that a demotion. I would consider that moving to best practices and getting a management structure in place where we're always moving forward collectively, and that employee being meeting the skill set for what they want to do. I mean, it was an artificial mechanism to address compensation that we're now able to undo, and we just need to thoughtfully and work together to sort of unwind that and get everybody moving forward. Is that?
Well said.
Okay. In terms of funding, you're saying that it comes based on the department's ability to fund these increases. So is the university going to be giving perhaps a small percentage to each department in order to help really, consolidate this and provide funding for our valued employees?
So it's a really, really good question. Let's start several ways to look at that. I think as we move forward, there will probably be a component whenever there is a pay raise given moving forward, or there's a salary pool given where there may be a cost of living component of that, but there will also be a merit or other component of that. That would be decision driven from our Board of Governors in developing a budget for the next year. And so when I think you look at resources that are dedicated for that type of improvement moving forward, I think that's one mechanism. One of the things we've asked each of our administrative units and really everybody at the university is to move to best practices. And there's going to be, we have an aging workforce where the next several years there's going to be a lot of retirements. And as we relook and we revisit how we're staffed and how we move forward, some resources will flow from that may be able to be realigned and address some of those issues. And so I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all. Not every compensation adjustment is going to be all funded centrally. A lot of that depends on our state partners. We've lost $40 million in base funding compared to 2012. So, we hope we get to the point of stability from a state funding where the state economy grows and we actually get increases from a state perspective to where we can meet our people needs and meet our capital needs. We definitely want a workforce that's healthy and happy and moving that forward. And so it's going to take a little bit of an all of the above approach as we move forward. We get to the point of the state of stability where we can be talking about compensation adjustments over the long term.
What happens if you don't get a raise or anything like that and you feel you deserved one? How you going to stop the old buddy system?
And so I would tell you again, that's why we've got the grievance system. It's why we have an employee relations team. And so, we handle that the same way we handle it today. We have those concerns and things that come up today. It doesn't change just based on this policy, and we'll work to resolve those case by case.
Okay, we have quite a few questions coming in from the live stream, so we're going to take a few of those.
Fire today. That's great.
Yeah, so thank you for those. Two, in regards to the class and comp policy or proposed rule, will the decision for change in pay come from the direct supervisor in their department, or will it be handed down from the dean?
I think that's going to be unit by unit specific in terms of, however those decisions are made within that unit around their budget. But what we're trying to do is get comp out of the middle on a lot of those, and to say if you've got the budget and they're within the range, and you as a leadership team think you want to make that change, you can go ahead and make that change, and you don't have to go through the bureaucratic exercise that we used to go through to make those changes.
Okay. And then with regards to compensation changes within the range, can a supervisor decrease your compensation without any additional review?
No, that's not the intent of this. That's not, and we don't do that today, right? And we're not looking to add that tomorrow. But what we are looking to do is just free people up. Again, it's that folks have viewed the only way I could do this is get your job reevaluated. And what we're saying is it's not the right way to do it. That's not how we want to do it. And we want you to be able to move folks within the range as opposed to having to go through that process. But we're not looking to say, okay, now it's open season and you can start moving people down.
One in regards to reduction in force, what factors go into determining which position will be eliminated and how will those factors be weighted?
Okay, and so if you want to flip back to that. So the primary determinant would be performance. And again, so looking back over the last 24 months, in that spirit and intent of we want to keep our very best performers, you're going to look first at if you have, let's say an example, there are 5 of us in a like job, and the first thing we're going to do is look at who are the lowest performers out of those 5, and if we have to cut one position, well, that low performer is the position that's going to be cut. If we had to cut out of those 5, we had to cut 3 positions, and there's only one performance issue, but then we get into unique skills, and we've got some definite, unique, objectively definable skill that is relevant to that role, then we take a look at that on a case-by-case basis. If we don't have that, we'd go to seniority, and seniority would dictate if performance is the same, then the most senior folks are going to stay and the least senior people are going to go. But it's the whole spirit and intent behind that is whatever group you're looking at is you want to keep the best and the brightest, the top performers first, and then after you get through performance, if there's any truly objective, definable skill difference. So like I always think about maybe it's a certified electrician, or there's something like that where it's bona fide, you can prove it, and it's an objective measure that ties to the job, and you've made an investment in that, making sure you have that certification, you can use that, and then barring any of those circumstances, it's going to be seniority.
I have more questions from the live stream, but I want to give you guys the opportunity here in the room to ask any questions.
In regards to the reduction in force, if you would be a person that would be selected for that, and let's say you're within that period where you're receiving your severance package, but it hasn't expired yet, are you going to be allowed to be maybe given not special treatment, but if there are internal positions that are open, will you be able to be a candidate maybe first as an internal candidate versus an external candidate when being looked at for positions?
Spirit and intent behind this is that we're only using this if it's a cost issue, right? We've run out of funding, we've got some issue, and we've got to cut the position. So in theory, you should only, unless it's due to performance, you should only be impacted because it wasn't your fault. You were just in that unfortunate spot, right? So we're going to want to keep you as an employee. So our goal is going to be then to work to find other jobs for you internally. If you find one of those positions, if you work either with us or one of our affiliates, so if you wind up here, Research Corp or hospital, then your severance turns off at that point. But we're working to try to preserve your employment. Absolutely, we're gonna do that.
I noticed it's not in your. Sorry, I noticed that it's not like in your established list yet. Is that something that's going to be added potentially later?
This is just sort of what we did here with the bullet points from the policy, but our goal is to make sure that, if you're negatively impacted and you're an employee in good standing, you've got the ability to preserve your employment rights here. And we have built in there as well clauses around if you go to an affiliate, we turn off the severance. I mean, so we've thought through that. We do want to keep you if you're, unfortunately impacted. Back
Okay.
to
Yeah, we'll take a couple more from the live stream. So several more questions in regards to class and comp. So where can employees see a listing of the salary range for their title and or classification?
Jim, I'm going to punt that one over to you. So they wanted to see the ranges. Is that on the class and comp site?
I believe this, we're trying to confirm, but I think the salary ranges are posted on our HR compensation website. They should be listed there. We're checking that. And they haven't changed, and they won't change because of this new policy. So the salary ranges we have and the pay grade structure we have presently will be the same as what we move forward with. Now, they may be reviewed in the future and will be, certainly the salary ranges. But initially, we don't have plans to change our pay grade structure.
Yeah, what we want to do is just start using it, right? Because that's what we've not been doing, is we've just been moving people artificially up instead of moving them across the range. And so you have a lot of people that sit at the bottom of whatever range they're in. So initially, we just want to start using the tools we have and get managers used to the fact they've got the flexibility to do that. Have we verified? Have you found it?
We're looking.
Okay.
So we'll take
come
another
back to that
question while
once
they're
we
look.
find it.
We'll come back to you with an answer. So if an employee is at the low end of the pay scale, is there a % limit on how much the supervisor has the authority to increase the salary at one time?
No, but again, remember, there are budgetary constraints, those kind of things, so I don't want to create a false expectation that somebody goes, wow, I'm going to come out of this and I'm going to go get a 30% increase. But it is one of those that historically we've had a cap where, like, if you got promoted, you could only move 5%. We've done away with that cap as well because we thought that was an artificial limiter. We want folks to be able to pay people what they're worth. As long as you've got it within your budget and they're within the range, we want you to be able to pay it if you decide to pay it.
Okay. So one more from the live stream, a more general question. What tool or policies are going to be put in place to ensure supervisors are held accountable for showing favoritism, and are they going to be monitored by HR?
Okay, and so again, I would tell you there, we're going to handle that the same way we handle that today, right? So you've got a grievance mechanism, we have an employee relations team. If you've got concerns, we encourage you to call Employee Relations and we'll investigate that. And but that wouldn't change any differently based on this. We don't have a new system to build to deal with that as much as we use the existing machinery that we have and handle it the same way we handle it today.
Any questions from the room?
Run yourself to death. What I've never found to be right is being able to look up other people's wages. And then this that's going to happen, don't you think? People find out, well, this one's got a raise, and this, they'll be fighting.
Well,
That's what I see.
I'll tell you.
I never found it to be right to be able to look up other people's wages.
Yeah, I worked in private industry for 25 years before I came back to WVU, and that was one of those things that we would never ever do, right? That's sacred. We don't talk about it, and it's private. But we operate in a different entity here. We operate in the public eye, right? So everything that what we pay is out there on the state auditor's website. I know the first day that I was here, a reporter wanted to talk and do a story about me coming back, and then the next question is, what's your salary? Because we want to put that in a newspaper article. And I was like, really? Great. Welcome to New World. I totally agree with you. I think it's a crazy way to run a railroad, but it is what it is, and it's the transparency involved in being a state government entity, unfortunately. So it's just one more complicating factor we all have to live with.
Anybody else in the room? Okay, we're going to keep taking them from the live stream then. Where can employees see a listing of this? Oh, the salary range. We have an answer to that one. Sorry, this is, yep. So it is on the Class and Comp website, and the URL is classcomp.hr.wvu.edu. So we are going to put together a compilation of questions afterwards, and we'll put these out on the Bureaucracy Buster site, so you'll be able to find that link there as well. All right. Any more in the room? All right, we're just feeding the live stream then. So it was said that the department level will have the ability to reward employees within the salary range for their position. What about long-time employees that have maxed out of their salary range? What options are there for that audience?
Yeah, so one of the things that was also built into the policy is that anything that goes above the max or below the min needs approval outside of Class and Comp. So I'd have to sign off on any of those exceptions. And so if you think about that, one of the things we want to try to do as well is if that range is pegged to market, you want to pay people within that range. If we've got people that are on the very low end, which we do, and then you have people that are on the very high end that are maxed, when we get to something like a merit increase, you don't want to continue to perpetuate your problem. So like, let's say example, Rob's at $15 an hour and he's at the max of his range and the market for his job is $12 an hour. I don't want to move Rob now to $16 an hour. I'm just perpetuating that problem, and I've got Jim over there making $8. So what you'll probably see us do, and again, we haven't gone through detailing our next merit cycle or what that is, but we probably would take somebody like Rob and we'd say, Rob, you know what? You did a great job this year. You're deserving of an increase, but we're going to give it to you in a lump sum. But we're not going to continue to move your base rate up because you're already at 120% of market. That's how the rest of the world does it. That's how I'd like to do it. But again, we've got time to figure that out and solve that problem because we're not going to be doing that merit cycle here in the near term, but that's how I would prefer to handle that when we get to trying to reallocate some of those dollars and really take care of we've got kind of two groups of employees. We have people that are way above the market and way below the market and nobody in the middle. And what we want to try to do is slow that growth above market and move those folks that are lower closer to what the market rate is for their position.
Okay. Any questions in the room? Don't be shy. Okay.
They're feeding questions through back.
Yeah. Well, we have some on the Morgantown campus watching via webcast too. So, Class and Comp, what about ranges for non-classified staff? How does one learn those?
Do we have those on the site? Do we know where?
That's different. Those are more individualized.
Okay. You want to field that question then for the group?
We don't have a similar structure. Well, I guess our director of comp's not here, but we don't have those posted on site. I guess if you wanted to learn the pay range, you could work with the management of your organization, and we could provide that. But we're still kind of developing our structure, and then non-classified hasn't been posted as we have the classified historically.
Anybody in the room? Samantha, do we have any? Last call for questions. Anybody else? All right, well, if you guys don't have any additional questions, we'll continue to monitor those that are coming in via the campusconversations@mail.wvu.edu email address. And we'll work to post those on that Bureaucracy Busters website soon. Just a few quick kind of closing remarks. As we conclude the conversation, remember that you can visit and review this presentation later at the website that's on the screen. The FAQs that we provided out front, the one-page fact sheets, have been distributed a couple places, but they'll be available there as well. You may continue to submit questions, as I just said, and if you want to watch and stay tuned to eNews, we'll let you know when we plan to host the next campus conversation. So with that, I'd like to thank Rob and Chris for their time today, and thank you guys for joining us, whether you're here or on the live webcast. So.
Thank you.